how do you make them feel for being in your presence, and how they feel about coming to work? And ultimately, how do they feel about themselves when they come to work for you, right? Is really important. And so my question is, what are you doing to make your workplace fun, right? What are you doing to build camaraderie? What are you doing to rally up your troops and ensure that they see themselves as being valuable contributors to your team? Time has flown. It's almost been a year, and it's been a really good year, right? It's been a good year of change, adjustments, pivots for a lot of us. But it's been a really, really good year. And, I think 2023 has really been a year of, I'm going to call it a year of faith, right? And it really stretched that ability to walk in faith, right? Because it was that challenge of continuing to do good in the world that we know that we are put here to do. In a time period we don't really know exactly what's coming around the corner, right? And I think that times like this, what it does is that it builds your endurance, right? It builds your ability to really be able to go through hard things, right? Go through things that you don't easily see the outcome. And reality is, when you're building endurance, it's never easy to build endurance, right? Endurance doesn't come easy for anybody, right? Endurance comes as a result of trial, right? Whether you're running a race and you're building up your stamina to run that race, right? You build that stamina by going an extra mile than what you've done before, right? By stretching yourself, stretching your ability. And sometimes in life, no one person can teach you all the lessons that you need to learn, right? It's the lessons that you're going to be learning are going to be the results of your life experience, right? Your life experience, and really trusting in God and trusting that everything that he does, right, works out for the good of us, right? And even when we can't understand why something is happening in the moment, right? It's understanding that whatever is happening for us, right? And I'm going to use that word for us because, for really, everything that happens is really for our benefit, right? At the end of the day, even if we can't see the outcome that's right in front of us. But today what I want to do is I want to talk about the elephant in the room. Yes, I want to talk about the elephant in the room. And I want to talk about something that I think is impacting all of us. I think something that's impacting all of us, something that, not just in this room, but something that the whole world is going through right now, right? And I think that it's really an indisputable reality for all of us, right? That the world is going through a shift right now. I think of 2019, right around 2019, right after Christmas, I was flying off to Paris to celebrate my birthday, right? I was having a week in Paris, right after Christmas in 2019. And when I was leaving for Christmas, I had no idea, right? I had no idea in 2019 and in December of what was going to be waiting for us around the corner on the other side of 2020, right? I just figured it was going to be more whatever 2019 was. And none of us had a clue of what was coming in 2020. And I can't remember a time in history where there's been such a long, and I mean really long period of upheaval and change, right? I think 2020 definitely, I mean, the fact that it's called 2020, right? 2020 vision, right? I think means a lot, but it really has been a long stretch and upheaval of change for many of us. And, I mean, there are times that I think, because of all this change that's happened, I was like, Jesus must be coming back soon because of all the change that's been happening. And I don't think we've ever seen anything like this in history. We see that there's wars going on overseas. And many of these wars that are going on overseas are in ways, they're wars at home, right? They're proxy wars. They're proxy wars being fought for the preservation of a concept called democracy, right? There's political division, right? No matter what side of the fence you're hailing from, right? There's political division that's happening. I think there's been an increase in crime, right? In many parts of the country. And yet, ironically, when all this is going on, you've got an increase in crime. We're seeing something we've never seen before. And we've seen, ironically, unemployment at an all-time low, right? So in the midst of everything that's happening, unemployment is low. Everybody that wants a job has a job. You can have 2 or 3 jobs if you want a job, right? And it's interesting because what's happening for us as entrepreneurs is that your A players that are part of your team. I'm talking about your all-star performers, people that you count on to deliver, right? At an all-star level, right? Your A players, whether you realize it or not, are being enticed daily, right? And some of them are being recruited by recruiters, right? And they're being swept away by the likes of your competitors or headhunters, right? And I think that as an entrepreneur, it's unrealistic to think that all this upheaval that's been happening in the world is not impacting the psyche and the mental wellness of our team members. Okay. Meaning that everything that's going on, if you're sitting there, if you're a human being and you're watching the news every night, it's going to be affecting your psyche and your mental wellness. And I think that it would be a real disservice to our companies not to acknowledge that some of this upheaval that's happening in the world is not having an impact on team production, that's not impacting your team's morale. And I think that as business owners, as entrepreneurs, we have to acknowledge that the reality is what's happening in the world is impacting our companies. And today I want to talk about it because I want us as entrepreneurs and as leaders to really make a proactive choice to stay ahead of what's going on, right? Because we want to control our outcomes, right? As much as we can. We want to mitigate our risk as much as possible, right? Because what doesn't happen for you, right, happens to you, right? We want things happening for you versus to you. And so we want to have some control of those outcomes of what happens for me, right? Is what we want to control. And it's important to control what we can control because not only is this good for our companies at the end of the day, the things that we're going to be doing, right, to make sure that what's happening in this world has the least impact on our businesses, right? That, it's not only important for the business, but it's also important for humanity, right? Because I think not one of us started our business because we wanted to hurt humanity, right? Many of us, in fact, started our business because we wanted to create better outcomes for the world. And that was the reason why our businesses were started. And in terms of profitability, right? In terms of profitability, because we do talk profit first here, right? Your profitability increases the longer you retain your A players, right? So the longer you have your best people with you, especially if they can be retained at their peak performance, right? Meaning that they're top of the game, right? The better it's going to be for the profitability of your company. No matter what's happening, it's better for your company if you can maintain your A players from a long-term period and you maintain that peak performance. In an economic environment where the world has caught on, right? Because I think now world is caught on at this point. Hey, I want A players, right? I want more A players and I want your A players, right? The world is caught on to that now. We as business owners have to be really intentional about the work cultures and the environments that we're creating, right? We have to be very intentional that our employees are happy being with us, that they're happy coming into our offices or our manufacturing plants, that our employees are happy to be part of our team, right? Because reality is we have intentionally created an environment of A players, and that gets around when you create an environment of A players, right? Everybody wants to poach your employees, right? And gone are the days when an employer can have that attitude. Aren't you lucky today? You got a job, right? You cannot exist with that attitude anymore. I think that was an attitude that was prevalent in the 80s. It was prevalent in the 90s, where your team members had to feel like, I need to kiss up to my boss in order to be promoted and liked, right? That attitude is gone now. And today, the reality is, as business owners, as leaders, as entrepreneurs, every day we're courting our team members, right? Every day we're courting our team members. Every day we are really trying to prove to them that we are the employer of choice, right? That is the environment that we're in. And we have to prove every day, we have to re-recruit our employees that are part of us. And not only that, to retain your team members, right? To retain those A players on your team, we have to make sure our team members feel daily, right? That our team members feel daily that they are valued being part of our team, that they're valued, that they're appreciated, that we are grateful that they're here every day and they are welcome to come back tomorrow, right? We want our team members to feel that. And we want them to do this because, I'll tell you this, the employer that makes his or her team member feel valued, appreciated, and welcome, well, that's the employer that's going to thrive, right? That's the employer that's going to thrive in today's economy. That's the employer that's going to be retaining A players. And ultimately, that's the employer that's going to be rewarded with more profits, right? And I'm going to repeat this. If you want to win today, right? If you want to win today, you must create an environment where every team member, right? No matter where they're at on a totem pole, every single team member feels valued, appreciated, and welcomed. Okay. They need to feel valued, appreciated, and welcomed. Every single team member, whether that's the mailroom staff, the secretary, or the person that cleans the bathroom, right? Everybody needs to feel valued on your team. Because even if you say, I'm just going to focus on my A players, I'm not going to focus on my B and C players, that's a big mistake too, right? Because at the end of the day, if you're just focusing on your A players, word will get around, right? That you don't really treat people fairly, right? Word will get around that you're not a great person to work for. Word will get around that this is not a company that treats people fairly. And you do not want to be known as someone that plays favorites, right? This is not something you want to be known for. And so what needs to happen is you must create a culture where everyone there, feels valued, appreciated, and welcome, right? Even the ones that you terminate, right? Even if someone comes into your organization and they're not going to be the right one, right? Long term, they're not going to be that forever fit for you, right? Because there are going to be some people that you're going to bring on and they're not going to be that fit for you, right? How you end that relationship, right, is just as important as how you start it. And I think that's something that isn't talked about, but how you end that relationship is just as important how you start that relationship. So even if you have a termination, even if you are going to be breaking away and breaking that relationship, how you end that relationship is just as important as how you start it, right? I always say this, leave the world in a better place if you can, right? Leave that world in a better place if you can. Create win-win opportunities. And so what I'm saying is that when your team member comes to your company, right, when they join your company, when they come into work and they come to work the next day and the next day and the next day, when they walk onto your premise, that team member, needs to feel like they just walked onto their winning sports team, right? They just walked onto their winning sports team, meaning that they just walked into the kitchen. I'm using the kitchen of their best friend's home, right? And I like to use the word kitchen because who doesn't feel warm in a kitchen when food is being baked, when there's fresh scents of cinnamon and apple going? Who doesn't feel welcome in a kitchen? It can be a complete stranger and suddenly like, okay, we're in the kitchen. Good things are going to happen in here, right? Food does it like no other thing, right? You want that employee to feel like they just walked into the kitchen of your home, right? When they come in. And there was a show on television in the 80s and it was called Cheers. And you guys remember that show, Cheers. And there was this guy that his name was Norm. And the song would be like where everybody knows your name, right? Everybody knew Norm, right? Everyone knew Norm. And to create an environment where you're retaining your team, right? Your team members have to feel like everybody knows their name, right? They have a place in this organization where everybody knows their name. No one is a peripheral. No one is that odd man out that just doesn't fit in, right? And the reality is the leader that does his best, the leader that creates that familial sense, that leader that really makes people feel welcome where they can contribute their best, right? The leader who does his best, well, you know what? That's the entrepreneur that's going to win at the end of the day. This is going to be the entrepreneur that's going to be able to retain the best and the brightest talent, right? Who makes people feel like they're winning at the end of the day. And it's the entrepreneur who consistently, right? Who consistently delivers the best service, right? That's going to be the one that is able to retain his talent, right? And I'm going to beat that point in because consistency that's delivered over time when you're delivering that product or service over time consistently, right? That means your processes are being retained, right? And when processes are retained, right? Processes are retained when people are retained, right? And you cannot have consistency if your team is constantly churning, right? So if your team is constantly leaving, you're not going to be able to retain consistently. And I don't care. You can have the best SOPs in the world. And SOPs are important. All of us should be having standard operating procedures, right? But if your team is constantly changing, if that person that's sitting there next month is different than the person that's sitting there today, you're not going to be able to build consistent outcome, right? You're creating a uphill battle where you're constantly working. But when you retain your team, when you retain consistency, right, you sustain those consistent processes. Ultimately, it's the entrepreneur that retains consistent quality, right, at efficient levels, right? Because efficiency is also important, right, in profit first. That's the entrepreneur that's going to win at profit first. So if you're able to retain consistent quality at efficient levels, that's the entrepreneur that's going to win on profit first. So, what I want to do now is I want to talk about you as a leader. Okay. I want to talk about you as a leader. Now, as a leader, if you're the kind of person that walks into the office, right, doesn't say good morning to the person in front of you, and I don't care who the person is, that person can be your secretary, it can be your janitor, it can be your project leader, it can be your brand new hire. If you're that kind of person that walks into a room, doesn't acknowledge the person in front of you, if you're that kind of leader that just stays in your head, thinking about the day that you've got ahead, walks into your office and closes the door, well, guess what? Guess what? Your team doesn't know you, right? They don't know you. And if your team doesn't know you, right, they've got no loyalty, right? They don't feel any type of affinity for you. They don't feel like they're walking to that kitchen with that aroma of apples and cinnamons, because people are loyal to those that they see, right? And they're loyal to people that see them, right? They're loyal to people that hear them. They're loyal at the end of the day to people that treat them well, right? And sometimes it's about pay, but reality is when all things are equal, because at the end of the day, anybody can match pay, right? If you're making so much money per hour, I can pay that per hour. Anybody can pay that per hour, right? It's about how people feel around you. How do you make them feel for being in your presence, right? And how they feel about coming to work. How does this person feel about coming to work? And ultimately, how do they feel about themselves when they come to work for you, right? Is really important. And so my question is, what are you doing to make your workplace fun, right? What are you doing to build camaraderie? What are you doing to rally up your troops and ensure that they see themselves as being valuable contributors to your team, right? They are difference makers when they are joining your team. When they come to work every single day, they're making a difference in someone's lives. They're impacting the lives of others in a positive and significant way. How are you rallying up your troops so they have that passion, that they see that they know that they are making a significant difference, right, in your client's life? And the reality is, every single one of our businesses exists to make someone else's life better, right? That's the reason why your customers buy from you. They buy from you because they want their life to be better, and they know that your product or service can make that happen, right? And so my question is, how are you communicating this value to your team? How are you letting them know that you're contributing to this outcome for this person? You are a value creator here. How are you communicating that to your team? I know one of the things that we do is we share our stories, right? We share our stories. We share our client experiences. We share when our client has a significant win. And there have been many, right? And we talk about how does that win, how was that win accomplished through the work of our team, right? What were the steps that the client took? What did the team do to guide them in that particular way? And by the way, so many juicy morsels are learned in telling these stories, right? So it's about telling the stories, right? And not only are these stories encouraging, right, but there are lessons in these stories, right? There are tidbits, there are crumbs that can be repeated over and over again and follow to have that same result. And when we share, how did this win change the client's life for the better? How did this win pivot the client's life permanently, right? And we're sharing these stories, right? We're talking about it and we're teaching the how, the what did we do to help accomplish that, right? And I know that a lot of entrepreneurs, when we talk about building team, right, and we talk about creating an environment that's encouraging, because at the end of the day, that's what it is. It's creating an environment that's encouraging. A lot of entrepreneurs talk about the budget, right? They bring up the budget and they hammer things like how tight the budget is right now. And some of these entrepreneurs, are still learning, right? They're still learning how to pivot in 2023. And I respect their journey of discovery, right? Because 2023 was a very different year for many entrepreneurs. And there's nothing like learning to venture through obstacles. There's nothing like having to learn how to do that and recreate and do things differently. But the truth is you can create team camaraderie on any budget. Okay. I don't care what your budget is. You can create team camaraderie. I remember when our company first started implementing Profit First. It was like almost 10 years ago that we started implementing Profit First. And when I was implementing Profit First, I was in a pretty sad moment. I think that a lot of us, when we're making significant changes in our business, when we're making significant alterations, right, for how we do things, it can feel sad, right? It can feel sad. And I was feeling sad because, at the time that I was implementing a lot of these changes, it was right around that Thanksgiving holiday. And literally Christmas was right around the corner. And it was sad because at that time, our firm just didn't have the funding to do that traditional big Christmas lunch that we had always done annually. We just didn't have it in the budget. And we were used to these big fancy lunches. We were used to the fancy gifts. But that year had been an incredibly hard year for our firm. And at the time, we had some really large governmental contracts. And these clients were very, very slow paying. And I mean, beyond 90 days. So if any of you guys have ever worked in government contracting and they talk about reserves, right? This is why it was taking them literally 90 days to pay. And what was happening was because, our people needed to be paid every 2 weeks. What was happening was a lot of our cash flow was being tied up in accounts receivables, right? That were 90 days or beyond in arrear. And I remember at the time I was calling the client, hey, it's been 3 months. Have you approved the invoice yet? And I remember this client telling me, they were still trying to approve the invoice because they had to route it to every single department in the government, right? Now, don't let me get this started, okay? But when you're doing something like accounting services, right, and you're working with the government, that means it has to get routed to every single department for approval. So literally our money, our cash flow was being hung up in like getting every department head to approve the invoice. All right. It was a nightmare, right, for us. And I remember feeling sad because I didn't want to break the company holiday tradition, right? I felt social pressure to do what we had always done traditionally. But the truth is, I was using every single drop of profit at that point to fund this large non-paying government work that we were doing, right? Waiting for this check to come in. And I was fronting this payroll through the use of our profits from our other clients. So governments, please pay on time. We need you guys to pay on time. Small businesses really need you to pay on time. And I remember, talking to my coach at the time, and he told me, he goes, you know what? Do you remember the proverbial holiday ham? And you guys remember that proverbial holiday ham. It's that $30 IRS tax deductible ham that you're allowed to give away at the holidays, right, to your employees. And as a team member, you were happy with it. Well, sometimes in life, you can just give a ham, right? You can just give a ham sometimes in life. And it's something, right? It's something that's better than nothing. And the reality is, with clear communication with your team, right? That this is the best that you can give at this particular moment. They absolutely will be grateful, right? And that year, it turned around a little bit for us. We didn't end up doing the ham. We ended up doing coffee mugs. We got coffee mugs from Sam's and we put designer cocoa in those coffee mugs as a gift. And Maggiano's, which is like one of the best Italian restaurants in our area, must have heard my pain through the universe because they gave a special where, they had this $25 per person family style lunch that they were offering during the holiday season. And my team ended up having the best Christmas lunch at Maggiano's, right? It only cost me $25 a head. Who ever heard of that for a banquet style, family style lunch, right? And they really enjoy taking that half day off right after the luncheon. And so what I'm saying is be creative, be creative. The universe just requires that you give your best and you can absolutely have fun on any budget, right? Any budget that's out there, you can absolutely have fun. I met an entrepreneur once and he did one of the funniest things or funnest things I ever seen someone do as part of his daily huddles. Some of you guys may be familiar with EOS or the Entrepreneur Operating System. But one of the things that they recommend is something called a daily huddle. And what happens in a daily huddle is you have an event where the team gets together every morning, usually about 10 minutes a day, usually first thing in the morning, and it's at the start of business. And during this time, your team members each share their wins, right? But the thing is, you don't just share your wins, you also share your challenges. And sometimes if you need it, you even ask for help, right? During these huddles. Well, for this entrepreneur's daily huddle, what he did was they took out literally an inflatable plastic ball. You guys have seen them. You usually can get them in the checkout counter. They're like these plastic balls. They look kind of like beach balls. They're very like, very, very light plastic balls and a super light ball. And what would happen was this team during their daily huddle, they played literally a game of office volleyball. And what it looked like is they were literally tapping the ball to keep the ball in the air. And every time they tapped the ball, that was considered 1 point. And the goal of the game was to see how many taps the team could make together while keeping the ball in the air, right? So the goal of the game was just to keep the ball in the air and keep it from hitting the ground. And if they tap the ball 20 times amongst themselves, keeping it in the air at least 20 times, right? The next time when they played together, the next day, the goal was we can just keep it 21 times. But the goal of the game was just to best their best, right? So best whatever they'd done the day before, just keep the ball in the air, right? And what was happening was, they were having fun with each other during this daily huddle. They were having a blast with each other and they were learning each other's strengths. They were learning, what are you good at? How do you take losing, right? How do you take it when the ball falls on the ground? It was your tap that you didn't catch that tap, right? They were learning how to work with each other. They were learning each other's strengths and they were building camaraderie as they were doing it. And as they were learning, right, about each other by just keeping the ball in the air, they were also building memories, right? They were learning how to work with each other. And like I said, building a cohesive team can happen on any budget, even a dollar ball from the dollar store, right? It can happen. It just takes a little creativity and it really takes having the heart to want to uplift each other and do it in a fun way. Now, I hope that today was an incredible discussion for you guys. Just about really just keeping that environment fun, right? Even when things are heavy, right? Because that's what your team needs from you right now, right? Is a place that they can feel safe, a place where they can really perform at their best.